Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Ready for a deep dive into some pretty cutting-edge AI research?
Oh, always ready to dive in.
Awesome. So today, we're looking at a paper on a really cool new type of artificial neuron. They're calling it AKOrN, short for Artificial Kuramoto Oscillatory Neuron.
AKOrN. I like that. Catchy.
Right. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll know how these AKOrNs tick, what makes them stand out from the usual suspects, and why everyone's buzzing about them. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan.
Great, so let's jump right in. One of the things that really struck me about this research is how it tackles a pretty fundamental limitation of traditional AI.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about how most AI systems operate now. They're great at those static tasks like recognizing a face in a photo or, translating text. But the real world, well, it's anything but static.
It's constantly changing, throwing curveballs our way.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And that's where traditional artificial neurons, like the ones we see in deep learning, kind of hit a wall. They're designed for those snapshots of information, not for the kind of dynamic flow of events we experience in the real world.
Like trying to understand a sentence with all its nuances, or navigating a busy street, or controlling a robot arm in a constantly changing environment.
Exactly. And this paper really highlights another challenge, too, that whole binding problem thing.
Ah, yes, the binding problem. For our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, can you give us a quick refresher?
Sure thing. So the binding problem is all about how our brains effortlessly link different bits of information together. Like if I say red, round, and ball, you instantly know I'm talking about one object, a red, round ball. Simple, right?
No, for us it is. But for AI, it's a real head-scratcher.
It really is. And that's where AKOrNs come into play. They approach things a bit differently. Instead of mimicking that static structure of traditional neurons, they take inspiration from how real neurons in our brains actually work. They oscillate.
They oscillate. You mean they sort of pulse or vibrate?
Precisely. Like a neural orchestra, you could say, with all those neurons firing in these rhythmic pulses. And the really cool part is that these oscillations can synchronize.
So they're not just pulsing randomly, they're actually coordinating their activity.
Exactly. And neuroscientists think this synchronization is key for all sorts of brain functions, like how we think, remember things, perceive the world around us. So AKOrNs try to capture this whole oscillatory dance using a mathematical model called the Kuramoto model.
Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. Can you break down how AKOrNs actually work on a technical level?
Sure. So imagine each acorn as a multidimensional vector. You can picture it like a point moving around on a sphere.
Okay, I'm visualizing a point spinning on a globe. Go on.
Perfect. Now, the Kuramoto model describes how these vectors, these points on the sphere, interact with each other based on the input they receive and their connections with other acorns.
And this interaction causes them to synchronize, to kind of align their rotations.
Exactly. And here's the really elegant part. As they synchronize, they naturally start to group related features together. Like in our red, round ball example, the acorns representing red, round, and ball would start to synchronize, showing that those features belong to the same object.
It's like they're solving that binding problem all by themselves, just by virtue of how they're designed.
Exactly. It's a really elegant solution, and it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what makes acorns so exciting.
This is really fascinating stuff. So they're not just mimicking the structure of neurons, they're capturing the way they actually function in a dynamic way.
Exactly. They're dynamic, not static. It's a completely different way of thinking about artificial neurons.
And this opens up a whole new world of possibilities, right?
It does. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's step back for a second and revisit that whole issue of traditional AI struggling with dynamic tasks.
Right, like understanding language or controlling a robot in a complex environment.
Exactly. Now, because acorns operate in this oscillatory way, they have this natural ability to process information that changes over time. It's like they have this built-in clock, so to speak.
They can keep up with the flow of events instead of just looking at snapshots.
Precisely. And it doesn't stop there. Acorns have also demonstrated some pretty surprising capabilities, like solving logic puzzles.
Wait, they can solve Sudoku? Seriously, that's amazing. What makes them such good puzzle solvers?
Well, it comes down to their energy-based nature. The entire acorn system is always trying to reach a state of low energy, just like a physical system. So solving a Sudoku puzzle in this framework is like finding the configuration of numbers that minimizes the system's overall energy.
So they're not just randomly filling in the numbers, they're actually reasoning their way through the
Well,
puzzle.
exactly. They're using this energy-based logic to find the most stable and consistent solution.
That's incredible. It seems like these AKOrNs have a lot of advantages over traditional artificial neurons.
They definitely do. And that's just the beginning. They also show remarkable robustness against adversarial attacks and noisy data.
Adversarial attacks. For our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, can you quickly explain what those are?
Sure. Imagine you take an image and you subtly tweak it, just a tiny bit, in a way that's imperceptible to the human eye. But this tiny change completely throws off a traditional AI, causing it to misclassify the image. That's an adversarial attack.
Oh, wow. So it's like tricking the AI with these hidden manipulations.
Precisely. And these attacks can be a real problem for AI systems that rely on those static representations. But AKOrNs, well, they seem to see right through them.
So they're not easily fooled by these tricks. What makes them so resilient?
Well, remember how each AKOrN is represented by a vector on a sphere? That structure actually provides this inherent kind of regularization. It makes them less sensitive to those small, subtle changes in the input.
It's like they have this built-in defense mechanism.
Exactly. So they can learn, they can bind information, they can solve Sudoku, and they're not easily fooled by those adversarial shenanigans. It's really quite remarkable.
It sounds like we're just scratching the surface of what these AKOrNs can do.
We are. And there's one more thing. The paper also mentions this fascinating phenomenon called traveling waves that emerge in AKOrN networks.
Traveling waves, like waves of activity moving through the network.
Exactly. And while we don't fully understand their role yet, researchers think they could be really important for future developments.
So there's still a lot to uncover.
There is. But one thing is clear. AKOrNs are pushing the boundaries of what's possible with artificial intelligence.
It sounds like we're witnessing a real evolution in the field of AI. So just to recap what we've learned so far, AKOrNs are showing real promise in tasks like object discovery, puzzle solving, and they're incredibly robust to adversarial attacks.
And we've only just begun to explore their capabilities.
Exactly. And speaking of exploring, the paper actually goes into some really cool specifics about how AKOrNs perform in action.
It does, and that's exactly what we'll be diving into in the next part of our deep dive. We'll see how these AKOrNs stack up against other methods in areas like object discovery.
And we'll delve deeper into those Sudoku solving skills. Stay tuned, folks. This deep dive is just getting started.
Absolutely. Welcome back. We're right in the middle of exploring AKOrNs, these really cool artificial neurons that are shaking things up in the AI world.
And last we left off, we were talking about how AKOrNs have some pretty impressive capabilities, like their resilience against those sneaky adversarial attacks.
Absolutely. And now we're going to see those AKOrNs in action, see how they perform on some real tasks.
I'm excited to see how all these theoretical concepts we've been talking about actually play out in practice. So where do we start?
Let's start with something called unsupervised object discovery. Remember how traditional neurons struggle with that whole binding problem? Well, AKOrNs really shine in this area.
Yeah, because they're so good at grouping related features together, right?
Exactly. That makes them perfect for figuring out what objects are in an image, even when you haven't given them any labeled training data.
So they're basically learning to recognize objects all by themselves, without any hand-holding. That's pretty amazing. How do they actually stack up against other methods in this area?
Well, the researchers tested them on a bunch of different object discovery tasks. And get this, they actually outperformed some of the popular self-supervised learning methods. Even on a really challenging data set called Senra-Datex, AKOrNs were the first ones using a distributed representation to come close to those slot-based models.
Hold on, could you break that down for us a bit? What's the difference between a distributed representation and a slot-based model?
Sure, it's all about how you represent objects and their features. Think about it like organizing your clothes. With a distributed representation, it's like you're storing things in different drawers based on color, all the blue shirts together, all the red shirts together. But with the slot-based model, you have a specific shelf for each outfit, like predefined slots.
Okay, so AKOrNs are more flexible, like they're figuring out the organization as they go.
Exactly. They don't need those predefined slots. They just naturally cluster and bind features through their synchronization, remember. It's all thanks to their oscillatory nature.
So it's not just about mimicking how neurons look, it's about capturing that dynamic way they function.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a totally different way of thinking about AI, and it's proving to be quite effective.
Okay, so we've seen how AKOrNs tackle object discovery. What about Sudoku? We talked about their puzzle-solving skills earlier.
Ah, yes, Sudoku. The researchers really dug into those experiments, and the results are really fascinating. Acorns can actually achieve perfect accuracy on those standard Sudoku puzzles, and they even show some promising results on those more challenging out-of-distribution ones.
So to refresh everyone's memory, this all ties back to that concept of energy minimization, right?
Precisely. The AKOrN system is always searching for that sweet spot of lowest energy. So solving a Sudoku puzzle is like finding the arrangement of numbers that achieves the lowest energy state for the entire system.
So it's not just random guessing. It's like their reasoning, finding the most stable and consistent solution.
Exactly. And here's another interesting tidbit. The researchers found that giving the acorns more thinking time by increasing the number of those Kuramoto steps actually boosted their performance.
Wait, so more processing time leads to better results. Is that something specific to Sudoku, or is it a broader principle?
That's a great question. The paper focuses on Sudoku, but this finding definitely raises the question of whether it applies to other reasoning tasks as well. Definitely something to explore further.
It sounds like there's a whole world of possibilities to uncover with acorns. But before we get too carried away, you also mentioned something about their robustness earlier. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. Remember those adversarial attacks we were talking about? Well, even without any specific training to defend against them, AKOrNs show this impressive resistance. They even stand up to common image corruptions.
So it's like they have this built-in resilience to those manipulations. That's pretty remarkable. What's the secret sauce behind this toughness?
Well, their structure plays a big role. Those vectors that represent each acorn are bound to that unit sphere, remember? And that provides this natural regularization, this inherent stability that makes them less susceptible to those subtle, sneaky changes.
So they can learn, they can bind information, they can solve Sudoku, and they can withstand those adversarial attacks. It's like the ultimate AI package. But are there any downsides, any limitations we should be aware of?
Of course, no system is perfect. The paper does point out some areas for further research, like the need to explore different dimensions for those rotating vectors. Remember, they're moving on a sphere, and the number of dimensions of that sphere is something that needs more investigation.
So there's still room for growth and optimization.
Absolutely. There's also potential in relaxing that hard norm constraint on the oscillators, giving them a bit more freedom to move around.
It's exciting to think about what they might be capable of with a little more fine-tuning. But even in their current form, they represent a real shift in how we think about AI.
Exactly. We're moving away from those static feed-forward networks and embracing these more dynamic, brain-inspired systems that can handle the complexities of the real world.
It's like we're witnessing a real evolution in AI. So to sum up what we've covered so far, acorns are kicking butt on tasks like object discovery and puzzle solving. They're incredibly tough, resisting those adversarial tricks. And they're pushing the limits of what AI can achieve. Where do we go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it? What are the broader implications of all this? And that's exactly what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of acorns. We've covered a lot of ground, from their oscillatory nature to their Sudoku solving skills.
It's been quite a journey. And now it's time to step back and consider the bigger picture. What do acorns tell us about the future of AI?
That's the million-dollar question. We've seen how they challenge those traditional static views of artificial neurons. They're more dynamic, more brain-inspired.
Exactly. And that's what makes this research so exciting. It's not just about incremental improvements, it's about fundamentally changing the way we think about AI.
So what could this mean for the future of the field? Are we talking about some kind of sci-fi AI revolution?
Well, maybe not a full-blown revolution, but definitely a significant evolution. Think about AI systems that can learn and adapt on the fly, reason through complex problems, interact with the world in a way that feels much more natural, more intuitive.
It's like we're moving towards AI that's less like a rigid program and more like, well, us.
Exactly. More flexible, more adaptable, more capable of handling the complexities of the real world.
So if acorns have this much potential, why aren't they everywhere? Why aren't we seeing them in all sorts of applications already?
Well, like any new technology, they're still in those early stages of development. Remember, we talked about those limitations, the need to explore different dimensions, maybe relax some of those constraints.
Right. There's still some fine-tuning to be done.
Exactly, but those challenges also represent exciting opportunities for future research. Who knows what we might unlock if we can really push the boundaries of what acorns can do?
It's like we're standing at the edge of a vast, uncharted territory, and acorns are the key to exploring it.
Well said. And it's important to remember that acorns are just one example of this broader trend in AI research. There's this growing interest in developing more dynamic, more brain-inspired systems that can truly capture the essence of human intelligence.
So they're paving the way for even more breakthroughs.
Precisely. Acorns are a glimpse into the future of AI, a future that's brimming with possibilities.
It's mind-boggling to think about. If they can already solve Sudoku and exhibit those reasoning capabilities, what else might they be capable of down the road?
That's the big question, isn't it? What new doors will they open? Maybe we'll see AKOrN-powered robots navigating those complex environments we talked about, or AI systems designing groundbreaking solutions to those global challenges we're facing, or even AI assistants that can truly understand and respond to our needs.
It's really exciting to think about. And that's the beauty of AI research, isn't it? It's this constant journey of discovery, pushing the limits of what's possible, shaping our world in the process.
It truly is. It's an incredible time to be a part of this field, and acorns are certainly leading the charge towards a more dynamic, more intelligent future.
Will said. A huge thank you to our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of acorns. We hope you've enjoyed exploring these cutting-edge ideas with us. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those imaginations firing.